Question. I had a question for this lady whose name I forget, sorry. Sarah, sorry. It was mentioned that you have you're employed with GetUp, or you hold some position there. You do?
I'm a board member, not employed by.
Okay, oh, sure. Yeah, I was wondering is there any possibility, or have you tried to push this issue through GetUp? I know it's more domestic issues, but is there a
Look, at the
opportunities
moment,
there?
yeah, thank you for your question. At the moment, GetUp is, its remit is basically to try and, it's a movement basically that is for a more progressive Australia in every sense, be it, refugees or Indigenous issues or, even talking Islamophobia and whatnot. And as you know, as was mentioned in the presentations earlier today, what's been happening in the discourse lately is that refugees, brown people, Muslim, Palestinians have all been lumped into this one sort of big, one big narrative, just to basically link them all together and two birds or three birds with one stone. So what we've been doing is trying to make sure that that doesn't happen, especially in terms of Australian policy. And inevitably that does, when you talk about refugees or when you talk about global equality and anti-racism, you tend to obviously bring in the question of Palestine, especially when parallels are made with the colonization here and obviously Aboriginal history. So it does come up. It's not something that they have worked on in the past, and I've been a board member now for 6 weeks, 2 months maybe, almost. So maybe it's something that we can put on the agenda, but they're definitely aware, and it's definitely something that they're happy to support in their propensity and maybe in the future as well.
Hi, my question is for the panel. You mentioned that social media is powerful in, I suppose, showing the other side and giving a viewpoint to the other side and it being less biased. So how is this helpful for us when there is endless support by the US and the power of the Israel lobby in the US for Israel? And how do you see that playing out in the future, or the influence of, the social media in that sense?
Yeah, well, the thing I would encourage is not to see the US as monolithic, and that's the point I was trying to make, is that, yes, of course, right now US elites and the US government are as pro-Israel as ever, but if you look at the kind of trends socially, politically, demographically, the basis for that is changing. And this young demographic that is ready to be critical of Israel is the same demographic that that is supporting Bernie Sanders. And you don't have to like Bernie Sanders or be uncritical of him to recognize that there is behind him a wave of young people who are very dissatisfied with things as they are in the United States and who are very politically engaged and mobilized. And you see this on college campuses where the issue of Palestine, the term progressive accept Palestine, was used. When I was in college, 25 years ago, you had these sort of progressive coalitions that dealt with South Africa and Tibet and US intervention in Central America, and Palestine was totally absent. Now you see Palestine at the center of youth politics and student politics. These are key shifts. The other thing is that, yes, the Israel lobby is incredibly powerful. We're going to talk at the next session about the censorship that's going on, and the Israel lobby groups are very much behind that. But at the same time, there is a break in the consensus, and we saw that around the Iran nuclear deal, where it's very clear that the Israel lobby was absolutely against that deal, but they couldn't get their way. So it's important not to disempower ourselves by attributing to our opponents perpetual, omnipotent power, and to not see the shifts that are happening.
like to also add that when it comes to social media and the message that gets out in social media, we're not just raising awareness about a situation that's going on anymore. There's also the influence and the rising popularity of the boycotts, divestments, and sanctions movement, which is not only showing you what's happening, it's saying, and here is what you can do about it. And I think that will also change the dynamics greatly in the next few years. We're already seeing great change on the ground.
Yes. Who, him or me? Right, thank you. I want to use Ali's figures for the levels of support for Jewish atrocities to go back to the question of religion and invite him to comment on this, or the panel generally, but Ali in particular. The corrupt decision by the United Nations to establish the State of Israel was the result essentially of the guilt complex of the Western Christian world after World War II. And can he see a pattern here in which the generation which held that attitude and is now dying out, the younger generation which is opposed to Israel's conduct does not have a memory of that period, and I am concerned that the academic area with over 50% support must still be anchored in that memory of World War II and the decision taken at that stage.
I think clearly that sort of Holocaust guilt or Holocaust justification for not just supporting Israel but remaining silent in the face of crimes committed by Israel. Of course, it's very important to distinguish between Israel and Zionism on the one hand and Jews and Judaism on the other. It is Zionists and ironically anti-Semites who insist on conflating the two and claiming that there's no difference between Israel and Zionism on the one hand or Jews and Judaism on the other. And so that logic still animates, for example, the German elite's support for Israel and refusal to question Israel, is this sense that, misguided sense, that Germany can atone for its horrific genocidal crimes, the destruction of millions of Jewish people, by supporting Israel and being silent about Israel's crimes against Palestinians who had nothing to do with the Holocaust, despite Benjamin Netanyahu's lies that Hitler got the idea for exterminating the Jews from the Mufti of Jerusalem. So that is still there. But in this poll I mentioned by Frank Luntz, what they're finding, particularly among young people, is relying on the Holocaust justification for supporting Zionism doesn't work. It turns people off. And it also, you know, is contradictory to the marketing of Israel as young, dynamic, happy, outgoing. I mean, on the one hand, you know, you want to sell it in these very positive terms. On the other hand, you want to constantly be reminding people of genocide and imminent genocide. And I think the fact that this was the main strategy that Netanyahu used to try to stop the Iran deal is that this will bring on a second Holocaust. And that failed, and it failed with US elites, and it failed with the US Congress, and it failed with the US media, shows that people, I think, are capable of being horrified, as we should be, by the Nazi genocide of the Jews, and at the same time understand that that doesn't give Israel a blank check to do whatever it wants.
Right, I'd like to comment on the religion aspect of Zionism. First, I second what Ali said. I remember once I was having a discussion with one of my university professors, and we were discussing whether Zionism is a secular or not secular movement. And he said, no, it's a secular movement because, you know, we're not religious and it's not what drives us, but we do base our right of ownership of this land based on a historical document, which is the Torah. So, yeah, so for him, it's a historical document, yet it's still a Torah, which is a religious historical document. So I think Zionism by itself, it's a confused notion, confused ideology, and there's a lot of contradiction in it. It does claim to be secular, however, it does not shy from using religious discourse. And there's a quote by Ilan Pape that says that most Zionists don't believe that God exists, but they do believe that God gave this land to them. So, I can't argue with that.
In fact, I'd actually go one step further, and I'd say that it's probably not just confused, it's obviously very calculating and purposeful, because the idea is that, and it's the oldest trick in the book, manipulating religion and the belief in God to advance political aspirations and political goals. So quite clearly that's what is happening here, I think, in terms of trying to advance the Zionist project and ensuring that you have support from, you know, the opposite sides of the spectrum and everything in between. To go back to your point on academia in particular, especially in Australia, I think if we can take a step backwards and also look at it from the fact that universities here, education here is being completely restructured and commercialized, you'll see that there's a lot more of a wider issue. It's actually quite dangerous because it's taking on that neoliberal economic structure, and I'm amazed that it took us so long to get here, especially given the environment in Australia. So for me, it's not even just about the question of academia being and you know a lot of academics, as you mentioned, supporting Israel or being supporting a Zionist agenda, but I think it's widely an issue across the board. So for me, and that probably emphasizes the need even more for avenues like social media, because that is where you're able to get the different voices, and you're also able to train the trainers. So, for example, there's a lot of space given in media outlets like The Guardian here in Australia, where, you know, a lot of academics who are, I hate to say left or left-leaning, but if we're going to categorize them that way, are labeled as such, and they are professors who are committed to also training students and kind of, you know, I guess keeping alive that last spirit of academia in terms of critical thinking and questioning and taking a stance against injustice. So I guess don't lose hope entirely, especially in the academic sense. There is a palpable shift overall, yes, but it's not gone unnoticed and it's not gone unanswered, hopefully.
I'm just going to jump in before the next question and ask my own question to Ali, if that's okay. Your website has a lot of voices from Gaza, as you had mentioned, writing. And one of the biggest problems that social media and new media in general faces is ensuring the credibility and verifying the facts before publishing things. And we've seen with other conflicts in the region, there's been endless videos that you never know who's behind them, who's publishing them, what the messages are. And so I'd really like you to take just a few minutes to tell us about how Electronic Intifada does their homework, and you know, how do we navigate in general the internet?
That's a great question. It comes back to a point that that I think it was Bernard made in the first session about, you know, what is balance and what is objectivity. You know, this notion that I think has to be challenged, that, you know, that there's two sides to everything and they're somehow equivalent and equal. Our view is that there are the facts, And I don't hide my opinions from you about the situation, but if I tell you these are the facts, then, you know, I have to be able to back that up. And so that's, you know, I would say most of what editing is fact-checking, and we're very careful about that. So any article you read on the electronic intifada is very carefully fact-checked. If we have a statistic, a number, you know the source of it. We very rarely allow people to be quoted anonymously. If we do, it has to be a very good reason for that, but we don't use, you know, nameless or anonymous sources, again, for transparency and credibility. And when we're working with writers, you know, we're often working with very smart young journalists, but it's always the role of the editor to really push and to say, you know, if something is not clear, how do you know this? Is this something you saw yourself, etc. So making sure that we're very clear about where information is coming from, and you know, you know, ultimately your most important asset is your credibility, and there are groups who are out to get you. I mean, who are watching every single thing I tweet and waiting for a mistake. Well, no one's perfect. You make mistakes. If you make a mistake, you correct it, you apologize, you move on. But you try very hard to avoid making those mistakes. Now, with photos and videos, because this is important, you see a lot of stuff floating around the internet. Well, what we bring to that is, you know, what we can do as journalists and what we can do having, you know, knowledge and connections and relationships with people in Palestine is bring context. You see a video, well, the question we ask, the basic questions all journalists should ask: where, what, when? You know, where did this happen? When did it happen? Who does it show? Were there any other witnesses? Often you can speak to those people. So we never just put up a video without saying what it is or saying we don't know what this is. We put out as much information as we know. We seek more information and context. So what we're actually doing, you know, a lot of what we've done, I didn't show this, is debunking hoaxes. You'll see photos that claim to be from one place and they're actually from something else. We debunked hoaxes during the Gaza war, where there had been a video circulated by certain Israeli websites claiming to show someone firing a mortar with children, you know, a Palestinian firing a mortar with children standing right behind him. Well, it turned out that video was from Syria. So an important role we played was debunking it. So we want to stress credibility, accuracy, transparency in everything we report, because in the end, that's all, you know, your reputation, your credibility, that's the only valuable thing you hold on to.
Hi, I just wanted to extend on the other gentleman's question. Sarah, I probably will direct it to you, obviously being from Australia. Just with the younger generation, and obviously, particularly in 2014, when the war was at its height, you know, debunking, obviously, something that's probably really intrinsic in young Jews is obviously the story of the Holocaust, and always bringing that argument up to justify you know, their reason to have right of return and land rights and taking Palestinian land. And obviously, you know, you were saying things about myths and articles that the Israeli government put out, and, you know, how do you break that myth from an old story that's very intrinsic and a value system to generations of young Jews, to be able to let them be open-minded to actually see what's going on in terms of, you know, myth versus reality, like you were saying?
One simple answer, and I'm probably biased here, art. So I'm sure Samah can attest to this. Rhonda can attest to this, given that she's also a fiction author and I'm a poet. And my fiance actually does poetry workshops in schools. And it's been something that's really picked up a lot lately, spoken word poetry, performance, theater of the oppressed. And I know a couple of Muslim organizations now, not to conflate obviously the issue, but just to give you an example, that have started going into Jewish-only colleges, and there was a lot of controversy around that because the reactions. Everyone was waiting on the reaction, what the kids' reaction would be like, whether they'd hate it, whether they'd love it. But they're very engaged, surprisingly, and they're open and they're happy to listen to the different, perspectives on various issues. So for me, and this has worked especially from an anti-racism, human rights point of view. And whenever you kind of enter that debate, as I was trying to say earlier, it's really important to frame it on a wider, more fundamental kind of overview, in the sense that you want to talk, especially here in Australia, about colonization, about Aboriginal rights and Australia's history and how we can move forward from that. And you want to talk about racism, you want to talk about Islamophobia. All of these are critical issues that are linked, whether we like it or not, because of the policies that are being propagated, top down from government, from media, etc. So I think for us to be able to counter that, it's really about the stories. It's really about trying to get in there with the poetry and the theater, and having the kids quite simply put themselves in other people's shoes. And it sounds cliched, but we have seen it work. And so definitely, I think you are able to break the rules a lot more with fiction than you are anywhere else, and especially with kids at such a young age. Not that I'm advocating for indoctrination, I'm just saying definitely a lot more arts and artivism, if I can call it that.
Sorry. I'd like to reiterate Samah's point about the electronic intifada. I subscribed to the email, and I found it very useful, and also mostly that it's reliable, and I can forward it and share it without actually hesitating that it's actually accurate and the truth. So thank you, Ali, for all the work you do. Something that took my mind when you were showing that there's videos that you're incorporating within what you do, sort of through the social media, and the previous discussions about the human story as such. So in many what you're showing, there is a human story about this kid in particular. And hence, and also add to that our survey here in Australia is at least 60+% of those we surveyed over 6 years period basically answer don't know. They can't take a position because they've been told it's too complex and so on. And hence, human story perhaps is one way to get to them. So is the social media different than sort of the main media? That's my first question. And the other one, something I noticed is that a lot of people actually don't look at the source of the information. They just look at the title. And if the title is actually appealing to them, they're more than happy to share it without actually checking. And is this the trend? I mean, there was a case where Richard Falk put something up, 15 people shared it, but actually the link is broken. So these people actually didn't read the article. They simply, it was shared because they liked the title. And Richard, of course.
I'm going to tell a very quick anecdote to this. I did an interview with The Real News a while back, and the interview was about the internal Hamas-Fatah issues, and specifically about the salaries in Gaza. And they put out the video under the wrong title. The title read something to do with Kerry going to the US, with Kerry and the peace process, or Kerry pushing for the peace process. And there were more than 1,000 comments beneath the video, all of them talking about Kerry and the peace process and saying, great video, great interview. But I actually took the trouble of reading the comments, and I don't think any of them actually watched the actual video. So it happens, but I'll pass this on.
And that definitely happens, but the good thing is we do know exactly what gets read and shared and watched. If we've published the video, we know how many people have watched it, we know how long they've watched it, we know where they stopped watching it, and we know what articles get read, how long people spend reading them. So on the whole, you know, we have the capability to get information out to very large numbers of people. Doesn't mean every single person is going to read everything all the time. But also what, you know, it's true that there's a lot of immediacy to things, but I think what's also different about the internet is that things have a lasting value, and that wasn't true in the days of, you know, newspapers, because as the cliche was that, you know, today's news is tomorrow's fish and chips wrapper or whatever it is. But, you know, if we do, you know, what's nice is that we're spending a lot of time and effort on these stories, but they remain there as references. So we also know that people come back to them. And we can see that some stories we published a few months ago, a year ago, or 2 years ago, people are still regularly referring to them because they deal with a particular issue in an in-depth way, or they, you know, whatever it is, can have lasting value. So it's true that there are those drawbacks to the immediate, but on the whole, I would say that's, you know, no different to, you know, scanning a headline in a newspaper.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with that. Once it's online, it will be there forever. So, you know, be careful what you post, and basically nothing is private, no such thing. And this coming from a young, you know, very into social media person. I think in the same way that there's been sort of traditional media training, you know, spokesperson training, voice training, and, you know, for TV presenters, for radio, etc. There's even now whole jobs created around Facebook and analytics and training, how to write the perfect Facebook post, no joke, with the best headline. And we know that either even, you know, guidelines and training for how to write the best email if you are a fundraiser and you want to send it out to your members and you want money. And it's not just, you know, hi, give us your money. There's actually a method to the madness, and it's very clever, tried and tested. I can't reveal the secrets. No, I'm actually terrible at writing emails, so I should probably get the training. No, but in terms of the Facebook posts, there's definitely a lot to be said around how they're crafted, how they're put up, and they know that, for example, with the news feeds, as I was saying, that's, and I think it was Ali who said that 40, or was it someone earlier, sorry, 46% get their news from Facebook here in Australia, and that might have been Bernard, right? And then it's not just that, but there's a very short attention span, so they're going to watch a video for 5 seconds, 30 seconds. If they like it, they might continue watching. It won't be more than 2 minutes on average, which is why you'll see that that's usually what's shared and posted. So I think for us as, you know, activists or advocates, especially in this area, given the way that it is going, it's only going to get more popular. So it is incumbent upon us to get familiar with these tactics, get organized, and to do it and to practice it on a daily basis. It's really important and critical to get the message out there, just as it was back in the day to be, you know, a good opinion writer, a good spokesperson, a good radio interview. Yeah.
Hi, Karan. I just want to be visible to you guys. First of all, I want to say this is not some hipster scarf. I really am in solidarity with the people of Palestine. Up until now, I've only been able to help. I want to help the Palestinians in action, in person, and I've only reached so far as Ain el-Hilweh, but Fatah didn't let me in. Sorry. I do eventually, very soon, want to go to the occupied territories and help the Palestinians out there. And going on to the last point that you made, Sarah, I have been told by certain ISM and PSC volunteers in Palestine who've been there that they have been facing a lot of problems of deportation and being sent back. even if they come from the airport in Tel Aviv or through Jordan, that if there is anything remotely related to Palestine or pro-Palestine, a simple like on Facebook, then they will be, asked to leave. And I have had nearly a decade-long history of posts and events I organized and attended. Like today itself, I posted something. And I'm concerned because this is not my ultimate goal, to post stuff and make people aware. I actually want to help with my own bare hands. And if that's going to get, because you guys might have known about this issue. If you've ever been to Palestine, then is that going to be a major problem?
Major. From experience, it really depends who goes, but the people that I know who went recently were able to get into the West Bank. So, but I don't know, does anyone want to?
I'd like to thank you, first of all, for your solidarity. And I think the work that you do online is equally important as the work that is being done on the grounds in Palestine. I know there's this feeling of being monitored all the time, and you have to worry about things you post and what to say and what not to say. I think, of course, when you're making sense and you're obviously saying things that are you can support by facts, you have no reason to worry. The fact that they basically, because it's very random, right? I mean, we can't just wait for their, randomness and just build our solidarity or activism based on their mood, right? Otherwise, you won't be able to do anything. So I think I really, of course, people need to be objective, and people need to be factual, and people need to be, humanitarian when you're talking about the Palestinian cause, because anything else won't help the Palestinian cause. If you're supporting, I don't know, if you're anti-Semitic, or if you're anyone else, if you're anti-human, that doesn't help the Palestinian cause. But anything else, if you can support your arguments and your posts and you have facts, I don't think people need to worry about that. I know, having lived there for 30 years, I know how that feels, but I also know that it doesn't really mean anything. And this is how they basically operate. They try to scare everyone, and they try to scare you. Oh, you need to stay away from politics. Oh, you don't engage in politics. Don't engage, not just politics, don't engage in anything that is controversial, right? So yeah, this is a tactic that they use to deter people and solidarity movements from engaging. So I don't think you need to worry about that. However, I still do believe that the work you do online is very helpful. So thank you. Keep doing that.
And thank you for your solidarity as well. What I want to say is there's definitely been some increase in them denying entry to people, particularly Palestinians, Palestinian Americans, or Palestinians with other passports. It is very random, but we do know that there are occasions where people are asked about articles they've written or things they've posted online that have been critical of Israel. And my response to that, and it's still very random, there are people who are writing tons of things and they still get in. It's arbitrary. It's a military occupation. They do what they feel like. Their power is arbitrary. But where I come down on this, because sometimes people will come to us and say, oh, I wrote something for you a few years ago, and would you take it down because I'm afraid that I might not get in? Well, no, we won't take it down. And secondly, you can't really erase it. And thirdly, it's my opinion, I'm speaking in general. There are obviously sometimes very specific cases, but in general, it's better to be denied entry than to be silenced. So, it may be very good for you to go to Palestine and to see what's going on there, but it's probably more important for you to speak out where you are, to organize where you are, to get more people involved where you are than to go to Palestine and be silent, you know, because you're afraid that you might not get in or you might not get back in. So we mustn't let them exercise censorship through, withholding and denying access to Palestine. There are millions of people, of course, Palestinians first among them, who can never dream of going to Palestine anyway. So, I mean, for most of us, we're not better than them, that we deserve to go more than them. So that's my view.
Can I just raise this up a notch and ask the question about that website that went up by some pro-Israel groups that actually has Canary Mission, that actually has the pictures of Palestinians and pro-Palestinian activists in the US, and the threat of causing them to be unemployable if they continue on. So maybe you'd speak a little bit about this if you can.
Well, just very briefly, because I think we'll also address that in the next session. But the point is, yes, there's this website. Nobody knows who put it up, but it's obviously a very extreme anti-Palestinian group. And the idea is that if you're active on campus, you know, you're involved in things, they're going to put your name up and they're going to say that you're a radical and you support, so that, you know, because anytime you apply for a job, that your employer, potential employer, is going to Google you. Well, that only works if Palestine is an isolated and marginal issue. But if support for Palestine is normal, naturalized, becomes what's called common sense solidarity, if it's at the center of student politics, if public opinion is changing, then it doesn't matter. It's like the South African government putting up a website, you know, if websites existed in those days, saying these people oppose apartheid. Everyone would say, great, that's the kind of person I want working for me, you know? So we mustn't, you know, that sort of thuggery and intimidation can only work if we allow people who are speaking out to be isolated. If everyone speaks out, if everyone says this is not on, you know, you don't penalize people for speaking out on a human rights issue they care about, then that has no power.
I'd like to give you an example on how arbitrary and random it is. My husband was not granted entry, even though he's not Palestinian, to his own wedding. So, yeah. So, still traumatized, but obviously having to getting married by myself.
The question I have is, and I think it might have been answered by two of you in that last discussion, but I wanted to ask, do you have to participate in social media to be relevant in the fight for Palestine?
Well, look, if we're talking locally, I don't think it's, 100%, if you're not on social media, that's it, game over. Of course, there are many other ways you can do that, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of, for example, talking to local MPs, trying to get, Palestine on the agenda. Marrickville Council in Sydney is a great example of that. Even MP Julie Owen in Parramatta, also another great example. BDS is something that you can get active in. So definitely it is not the be-all, end-all. However, to give you, to shine a light on a quick example, I think Ali mentioned earlier that Israel has commissioned marketing consultants and, language experts, and what are the type of messages that we can craft to make sure that we've got Americans, for example, on site, especially in recent times, because traditionally when they controlled the message top down, that was a lot easier. And a lot of the keywords were, Americans don't like talking about demands, and they don't like the word people making demands, so that's how you need to frame it. Israel is obviously a victim. Palestinians are making demands that can't be met, and so on and so forth. Many very interesting examples if you're into that sort of study, the power of language and thought. But the funny thing is, social media was a great avenue, as you would have picked up today with the countless examples of putting cracks in that and showing that, you know, yes, you can have this myth and you can foster it and build it, but the reality is that it is a myth. It's not reconcilable with the truth. And there were so many great videos and stories, and as we said before, showing exactly the opposite of that myth. And so, you know, I wouldn't discount social media just yet. Maybe give it a shot and see how you go, but definitely don't despair if you hate it and you definitely don't want to be on.
Just to add quickly and build on what Sarah has said, I think it's important because it has proven to be effective in terms of shifting and changing people's minds, at least the ones that are on the online sphere and the ones that are using these social media accounts or whatever. So I do think it's important. If you can do it because it has an effect and it's been documented and reported, so it's a good method.
I was just going to say, I find it really hard to reach people who are not on social media, to tell them what's going on, to send them events and stuff. I actually have to pick up the phone and call them. So I would imagine that you don't have to be relevant. I have to actually, no, but you know, you can be relevant for Palestine on social media, off social media, but you do miss out on a great lot of information when you're not on social media.
Well, this panel has an inherent bias because social media is in the title, so you could come away thinking this is the most important thing in the world. But I know lots of people who are not on social media who don't use it. I know lots of people of every generation who use social media, but there is probably a generational element to it. And people use it in different ways. So for some people are very active in publishing things or, you know, engaging in discussions. For others, it's just a way to sort of read and see what's out there and to kind of monitor things. So you can use it in different ways. There isn't a right way or a wrong way. I mean, there is a wrong way. In other words, don't publish stupid things that you don't, you know, that you'll regret. Think about what you publish, just so think about what you say. That's common sense. But there's lots of very important work to be done. It has nothing to do with social media. So if you talk about the BDS campaigns, you know, if you talk about academic boycott or other forms of building support for boycott in trade unions, there's a lot of face-to-face work that has to be done, educational work that has to be done, organizing that has to be done in person. And, you know, some of the most effective people who are doing that, you'll never name or see them on social media. For example, you know, in the United States, in the last year, we had some really big BDS victories, like, you know, the Presbyterian Church and the United Church of Christ divesting from companies involved in the occupation. Well, I know many of the people who are involved in that work. It's a very hard slog, but it's a lot of face-to-face work, a lot of attending meetings and conferences and all sorts of things that can't be done, you know, through their work may be enhanced, their communication may be enhanced by social media. Some of them are active, but a lot of that work is still, you know, old-fashioned, if you want to call it that, organizing or face-to-face organizing. So if that's your thing, it's just as vital to this cause as, you know, any other type of activity.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you join me in thanking our panel again, Sarah, Noura, Samah, and Ali Abunimah.